Hello everyone, good afternoon. Um, so I'm here with my team to present a session on climate information and food security, impactful outcomes of NASA and USAID survey partnership. Um, I have with me in room Dr. Catherine Nakalambe. She surveys applied science stream, agriculture and food security thematic area lead as well as PI. And I have Ritika Basu, who is research economist with SERVIR, and I have online Prasad Bhandaru, who is also a service applied science stream PI. With that introduction, I'll quickly start. All right. So in today's agenda, we will have first introduction to SERVIR and what are and which are the service food security services. And then we will have Catherine to give deep insights on how does the cropland area monitoring service in Africa is supporting to food security. And then Prasad, who will talk on the rice forecasting service in Nepal and challenges and strategies in that service. And then I'll have Ritika to take over on talking about what the economic impact of these services is having. And then we'll have some quick question and discussions. So with that, I'll directly jump into who is SERVIR. So SERVIR is a joint initiative of NASA, USAID, and leading geospatial organizations in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. So these different organizations and with these different countries, SERVIR is looking with this service-driven approach to address challenges in agriculture and food security, weather and climate, as well as water security, ecosystem and carbon management. So mostly services are focused on developing countries in different continents. For example, we have these different hubs, Service Southeast Asia hub, where Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, who is the chief organization there, and it covers countries such as Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia. Then we have SERVIR Hindu Kush Himalaya hub, where International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, who is the chief organization there, and the countries come under that are Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And then we have Eastern and Southern Africa region, where currently our applied science team is active, and the project is focused on the rangeland monitoring and cropland monitoring. And then we have SERVIR West Africa, where ICTforAg is the center chief organization, and then we have SERVIR Amazonia. So all these hubs are situated through the USAID's USAID's office in Washington, and these hubs are supported through the USAID, and NASA brings the applied science team from the.
Sorry, Garen, before hearing you. Garen, sorry, you have to mute.
Yeah, sorry. All right. So SERVIR's applied science team is situated in the US, and those different US-based organizations are not only the academic institutions in the United States, but also different research institutes, as well as the US Forest Service and the government services which are included in it. So what are exactly the services are and how are they driven? So the approach usually we have is driven by locally led. So what does that mean is our services are demand driven, our partners are implementing.
As well as in Rwanda doing capacity building. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think, I kind of always like to kind of start with the motivation for why we choose to do what we're doing the way we're doing it. This is obvious to, I think, everybody in the room, the disproportionate burden of food security in Africa. And we're seeing immense, huge factors that are driving this disproportion in the sense that while we think we're making progress, it's like 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. As an example, this year has been an extreme event in an extreme year, both Southern Africa, East and Southern Africa as well. So we've seen extreme floods. There's El Nino overlapping with like local climatology that kind of led to an extreme flooding event at the start of the growing season in Kenya. We're going to yet see the consequences of that. There was a drought in Southern Africa. These are significant, really huge events impacting really, really large areas, and we have to pay attention to that. And I also want to mention that while my work focuses on Africa, we have to look at food security or food systems as a much broader beyond. So you can't only look within Africa in order to understand what the outcomes might be at the end of the season or at the end of the year, or how you might overcome those. For example, following grain production in the Ukraine is a good way of understanding crop availability of food, for example, in Egypt. So some things to kind of lay the background. The other thing is that there are within continent efforts to advance and improve food security that we have to be aware of, and so our work has to support those initiatives or figure out a way of supporting those initiatives if we want to make steps forward. So from a remote sensing perspective, while we might be able to map where there might be reduced productivity, potential increase in productivity, potential improvements in access to infrastructure or green infrastructure, we would not be able to implement that kind of work at the level that is required for the farmers or the communities that will benefit. So we have to kind of be aware of these programs and how our work can contribute to those things. So in terms of Earth observations, which is sort of the basis and investments in terms of what we do, there's some things we can contribute to. So from a farmer perspective, they want to know if you're a farmer and you want to improve your productivity, you want to know, when can I plant? Is it appropriate to plant now? In the context of this year, perhaps farmers in Kenya could have waited and planted right after the extreme floods, but that information was potentially not available to them. What crops to plant, what might be efficient, what might be the most efficient crop for me to grow in my region that might get me a yield that will get me a good market price. But then how do I balance that with our own food needs? From the perspective of a decision maker, we're looking at the same things, but at a much broader scale. So the Ministry of Agriculture needs to know, where can we send inputs? Where can we provide aid? They need to understand these things, and the ministry does not need to know it for an individual. They need to know it for a much larger region, but it also needs to be contextually relevant. So if it's been an extreme event, you have to give proportionate support to that particular community. And so the premise of sort of our session is how are Earth observations supporting this, and how are we doing it differently through the SERVIR program. So we have satellite data. I think we've had a little bit of that already today. Data being collected everywhere. Some of the examples that Aparna showed, showing different use cases for different regions that basically have the same foundation. We have satellite data. We have all sorts of modeling applications that have been built on top of this that are giving us insights about regions that we wouldn't typically be able to monitor. And so that's kind of the framing. And I'm showing Aparna's slide again to make the point is that we are looking at it from top down, so from space. But how do you make it useful? So how do I know what is the usefulness of understanding NDVI, Normalized Differentiation Index, for a large area from my desk in Maryland versus understanding the significance of that indicator from the Ministry of Agriculture's perspective versus the extension agent who is on the front line, potentially interacting with the farmer who is a farmer themselves. And that's sort of the model that the SERVIR program is trying to build. How do you bridge this overarching large-scale extensive mapping and monitoring capabilities and cutting-edge technology, and how do you bring it to be useful not only for the individual, but for a decision maker for the different regions? And satellites allow us to be able to see different places with the same eyes, so build similar models that are contextualized, but then you need to add another layer to make it useful for a particular region. So I just want to show some examples of work that we've done before, and that kind of bridges the model. So earlier, in an early ESSc project, we worked on building Kenya's first national crop monitor. This was built off of the GeoGlam crop monitor process, which is a recognized system and process for gathering and understanding crop conditions in multiple countries around the world. We've deployed something similar in Kenya, in Tanzania and Uganda, and we started to develop it for Kenya specifically. For each one of the countries where it has been deployed, through SERVIR, being able to do it with Rwanda as well as with Ethiopia, is that the system has to be contextual. So the reporting level is different, who does the reporting is different, and how is information gathered from the ground is very different. In the case for Kenya, through county extension agents who are trained as part of the process, who synthesize information for their particular county, it goes to the ministry. Then the ministry individuals actually look at the satellite data and look at different indices to tell them, you know, how does that compare with what's happening on the field. Similar things, similar process for when the floods happened this year. It's the same process. So we have an understanding of where flooding has happened, but how does that look like on the ground? So the crop monitor for Kenya was implemented, was sort of like the initial thing that was supposed to happen. And then an Eastern Africa crop monitor was set up to integrate other countries in the process through a SERVIR project. And then that kind of, you know, unfolded into supporting their insurance program, as well as connecting with the insurance team at the ministry. And I just added some quotes here from the ministry, from their experience working with us, as well as what they've been able to do. So we have a really active network of crop monitors who are extension agents in Kenya, contributed to this process, and we're further improving and iterating on this process to make it more useful. Another example around methods. So across all the countries where we're working, there's always fundamentally underlying data that we need. So I said same eyes, different places. So you look and create a cropland map, a crop type map. Senegal, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, you can name it. However, how you develop it and how rapidly how you develop it matters. It could take months, it could take weeks. Also, you can develop it in an hour, but the quality of it might be very questionable. Or you could, kind of access an existing data set and just go with it, believe it. It's, when you see something on the internet, you believe that it's true. It's the same with Earth observations. If I showed you a map, you automatically believe that it is like the truth. Somebody took time to prepare that map. And so from what we've been doing in our team, we developed OpenMapFlow, which is an open source pipeline for using Earth observations and deep learning methods. We particularly use an LSTM, which is a long short-term memory neural network method for using time series data to create a cropland or crop type map, depending on the type of data that you have to train your model. We've deployed this. We started with Kenya as a test country when we're working on a previous SERVIR project. And this has become sort of a default method for creating rapid maps, basically. What does that, so that is really cool. We can create a map for everywhere, all the time, whenever, depending on the time and effort that we have. However, many other organizations are doing the same thing. So why do it? So in the process, we decided that maybe we should come up with a different way of just evaluating what is available, so we can just pick from that rather than create our own pipelines. I think everybody who works in this space wants the same thing. You want to have the best, and maybe you don't have to invest in the time to create it. And so we've now developed another pipeline, which is to allow you to evaluate existing maps. And I added the QR codes. The bottom one is blocked, but you can check out a recent paper. What it shows here is that while there's so many products, they might not be accurate for the place that you're looking at. The example is the panels on the right showing different maps for Senegal for about the same year, showing completely different results. Not completely different, but generally you can see that there's a lot of misclassification for cropland. The purpose of this slide was to just show that while we're learning through the work we're doing with SERVIR, we're also learning how we can improve our own internal work, at the same time do what's the most useful for our field in general. And then another example, just talking about capacity building, which is a cornerstone for the SERVIR project. So we develop methods, we explore things, we deploy tools that have already been tested and work in other places, but how do you ensure that it actually remains useful and sustainable? So we spend a lot of time doing training. We've done joint trainings across applied sciences projects, one that might be focusing on climate, other focusing on agriculture. these are fields that you don't want to do separately if you want to understand agricultural sustainability. And so we've trained over the years multiple, everything from working with individuals who work in the ministry. So analysts who can understand, who can look at a map, summarize it, download it, and do the same thing over and over to produce national reports. And also working with extension agents who are on the ground doing data collection. So in terms of, kind of a summary is that what we want to be able to do is advance the methods. So you want to use the most cutting edge approach to doing something, but it needs to be contextual and relevant. So you can actually train the specific stakeholder for whom it will be the most useful. So while a crop type map might be useful for a researcher at a university, it might not be at all useful for an extension agent. So how do you bridge these two things is some of the stuff that we've been able to do within our work that we're doing with SERVIR. So, key thing is we want to accelerate and share knowledge. And one of the cornerstones too, I should have mentioned, is that making data sets, publications, platforms, open access is probably one of the most powerful things, because once we've deployed and worked on something, it continues beyond the time for when we were working with a particular end user organization. And I believe that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Catherine. With that, we will have Prasad, who is online, to give us insights on his current project in Nepal for yield forecasting. Over to you, Prasad.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there physically. So can I control the slides or just need to ask?
Yeah, you can just ask Prasad. You may not be able to control.
Okay, can you go back to the first slide? Okay. So this is our first NASA SERVIR project. So we are into the second year. We don't have any significant results or any impacts. So just to mention that. So anyway, in this project, we are developing a rice yield forecasting system for Nepal that can produce monthly yield outlooks at sub-district level. So for that, we are trying to use an integrated approach that combines process-based crop models, remote sensing, and seasonal and sub-seasonal weather forecasts. So there are quite a few challenges to develop this system, and we are trying to address some of these challenges. So in this presentation, I will go over what are those challenges, how we are approaching to address these challenges. Next slide, please. So firstly, let me start with introducing our crop modeling framework that we are using to develop this system. So essentially, we are using a process-based crop model called EPIC, which stands for Environmental Policy Integrated Climate Model. So it's a semi-mechanistic model. It has various subroutines representing different plant and soil processes, and can simulate crop yields, crop growth, crop water use, and carbon and nitrogen dynamics, and so on. So as an example, you can see the model has a very detailed carbon subroutine in the center. On the right side, it has also 5 different potential evapotranspiration methods which can be used to simulate the crop water use. Next slide, please. So using this EPIC model, we developed a spatial modeling framework that can process different spatial input data layers and run the model for individual fields or a pixel parallelly, and post-process all the output to create the spatial output layers at high spatial resolution. This framework we have been using quite a few projects, including our SERVIR project. Next slide. So here I briefly talk about a prototype yield forecasting system that we developed for the US as part of NASA Harvest program. So when we use process-based crop models for yield forecasting, the one requirement is we need to have a whole growing season weather data. So which means that if we do the forecasting in the middle of the growing season, we need to rely on some sort of future weather. So some typical sources include a seasonal, subseasonal weather forecast from the climate models and statistical weather generators that can produce different realizations of the climatology. And third one is simply a historical weather as a proxy to represent the future weather. So it doesn't matter what weather we're gonna use, there would be uncertainties in the future weather, which causes some level of risk to use the yield forecast. This risk is higher when we do the forecasting early in the growing season compared to close to the harvesting period. Next slide, please. So considering all these uncertainties, we decided to produce two different types of yield forecast. First one is early in the growing season qualitative yield forecast, which provide simply a relative yield condition compared to the historical average yield. And second one is close to harvesting actual yield estimates. So this schematic shows the workflow of our forecasting system. Essentially, uh, the EPIC modeling framework that we have is forced with the ensemble weather forecast from the SUBEX system and simulate the yield distributions. These yield distributions are used to produce probabilistic qualitative and quantitative yield forecasts. So next slide. So here I'm showing an example, 2014 corn qualitative yield forecast for July and August months. What you see on the left side are most likely yield conditions at the time of forecast with relative to the average historical yield, and then corresponding probabilities on the right side. 2014 is a generally it's a normal year with a favorable growing conditions. As we expect, most of the counties were shown to have favorable growing conditions, yield conditions. So the next slide, please. So here are the quantitative yield forecasts for the month of September, which is close to the harvesting, 2 months away from the harvesting. So the ones on the right side are mean ensemble yield forecasts. And as you can see, these yield forecasts showed a reasonably good agreement compared to USDA reported yields on the left side. So currently we are working to improve this forecasting system by using the better weather forecast and also optimizing the model parameters through using the remote sensing data. So next slide. So essentially, we are trying to develop the similar forecasting system for the Nepal to improve the Nepal food security monitoring system by providing the reliable yield monthly outlooks. So you can see the schematic here showing a general architecture of the system. So essentially, we integrate different inputs like in-season crop type mask from remote sensing, weather forecast, and also remote sensing estimates like leaf area index and phenology into our modeling framework. Around it, we build the web system so that we can produce monthly yield outlooks that can feed into the Nepal food security monitoring system. So next slide. So, but like I mentioned earlier, there are quite a few challenges we are facing. Firstly, all the spatial inputs are very coarse in spatial resolution. As you can see on the far left side, the soil map for a Banki district, our pilot study region. So there are only like 7 to 8 soil unique IDs. So that means it's a very coarse. So similarly, the weather forecast data, SUBEX forecast data is 1 degree spatial resolution. 1 degree is very coarse for agriculture applications. And also there are issues with the remote sensing data. Optical data has a lot of data gaps because of the monsoon season. Generally rice is cultivated, and also the SARS Sentinel-1 SAR data has issues with incidental angles affecting the backscatter coefficients because of the mountainous landscape. So these are the typical challenges we are facing. Some of the challenges we are trying to address. Next slide. So we are working with ECMOD partners. They are trying to get the region scale soil survey data from Nepal Agriculture Research Council. So NORC has conducted the soil survey at very high, region scale. So that data is not publicly available. We are trying to acquire and create the database to use in our forecasting system. And also we recently developed a deep learning model to gap fill the optical data, and also working on a data assimilation technique to combine the both optical and SAR data to get the more accurate remote sensing estimates for Nepal. And similarly, we are implementing a downscaling and bias correction approach to improve the resolution of the weather forecast. So this approach has been implemented in the US when we developed the in-season nitrogen recommendation tool for Kansas and Oklahoma as part of NIFA project. So next slide. So while we are trying to address these issues, we are just thinking what is the best option to do the long-term sustainable forecasting for the Nepal. So recently we discussed these options with the ministry and ECMOD. As you can see here, the first one is the pixel level yield forecasting, but which is computationally very intensive, and also there would be uncertainties even though we address some issues that we are facing. And the second one is yield simulations at sub-district level by aggregating all the inputs. But this method is easy to implement, but we have to compromise for the uncertainties by averaging the data. And the last option is sampling approach. In this approach, simply we can create the sampling locations, spatially representative sampling locations for each subdistrict by accounting the variability, the yield variability within the subdistrict, and collect the data for each location and calibrate the model. So then when we have the well calibrated model, we can provide the yield forecast for each sampling location, which can be aggregated to the sub-district level for reporting purpose. So considering the uncertainties and mountainous landscape and all those things, so the best possible option is a sampling approach. That's what we are trying to implement in our pilot region, which is a Banki district. Next slide, please. So the first step for the sampling approach is to determine the sample locations, considering the yield variability for each subdistrict. So for that, recently we conducted yield simulations at 100-meter spatial resolution using rice maps produced by the ECMOD and different inputs that are available, soil and weather data, so that we can get the yield productivity map showing the heterogeneity within the each district. So next slide, please. So this is the rice yield productivity map from our recent simulations. As you can see, these estimates showed the general spatial patterns exist in the district, showing the higher yields in the southeast part and compared to the northwest part. But also you can observe that there is a sharp changes in the spatial gradient because of the coarse resolution of the soil data. So once we have the region scale soil data and integration of the remote sensing, we are hoping that we can be able to capture the fine scale spatial variability existing within this pilot region, and which can help us to sample the locations to collect the field data for our yield forecasting. So the next slide. So these are conclusions. So we have the prototype forecasting system for the US. We are trying to develop the similar system for the Nepal, but the issues are there. We are trying to address those issues, working with ECMOD and also developing different data assimilation and deep learning methods. And currently, given the options, I think sampling approach is the best approach, we think. And then we are implementing that approach for one district in the Nepal. So I think that's pretty much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasad. As you heard from us about SERVIR, we ran the service design approach and examples in Asia and as well as Africa. Oops, I'm sorry. So now I will have Ritika to talk about what are the impacts of these services in these hubs. What are the economic impacts, how the farmers or other stakeholders are getting benefited, and how do SERVIR measure that? Over to you, Ritika.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to refer a lot to my notes because I'm new to this, as is the economic impact assessment to SERVIR. So SERVIR has been existing since 2005 with a lot of services in development, a lot of services that has been already delivered. However, economic impact assessment of these services and tools is in the process of getting integrated with the services, which is an eventual happening. Right now, we are focusing on individual projects to understand what the impacts are of specific services. I am going to start with what we have been doing so far. So I started off like 8 months back. We developed a white paper on economic impact assessment of SERVIR tools and techniques. I don't have the DOI here because it just got published like 2 days back, but this is how we went about by developing it. So as Aparna had mentioned, that we SERVIR co-develops its services with the help of its hubs on several locations. One of the upcoming hubs is in Central America, but the others are in West Africa. There was an existing hub in East and South Africa, Hindu Kush Himalayas, Southeast Asia, Amazonia. So all these regions, we spoke to all the hubs, we spoke to all our stakeholders, we spoke to some of the ASTs, and we developed network-wide questions, and we formulated hypothesis on what are the economic impact questions that we should be asking depending on the stakeholders' needs and importance on the field. Post which we worked on determining appropriate methods to do that. Of course, that is subject to change when we actually get to working on specific questions. And then we estimated feasibility and importance, which is also dependent on availability of ground data. And that's a huge task. We have Earth observation data, but we do not know as to how it is being used. So SERVIR's job is basically to provide this data to the through the hubs to the national and probably the local level government, but we do not have knowledge beyond that, and that's what we are trying to get to understand how it is being used and if it is actually causing any impact. We develop a production. So for each project, we develop a production plan, which basically is a timeline for what we are doing when. And in our minds, each project is like for a year, but then obviously we'll get to know when. Right now, I'm getting to the type of projects that you're working in, but it's a 1-year timeline for each. Then we will build on existing models or build a new model depending on whatever data is available and analyze and interpret results, and post which we'll conduct trainings and workshops to spread awareness regarding the economic impact assessment and that every service and tool should have it in order to improve things in future. So depending on the assessments that we had done so far. We are currently working on 2 projects. One is economic impact assessment of Smokewatch tool in Chiang Rai, Thailand. Smokewatch tool is actually developed from Air Quality Explorer service by SERVIR. It provides with near real-time fire information, and we are looking to see how that information has impacted the agricultural land burning and land cover changes. The other that we are working on right now is in collaboration with NOAA. Its application of GeoGlows in Ecuador, which gives stream flow predictions, and we are studying how that is being implemented and what is the impact of it. It's not okay. So just to give an understanding of the type of questions that we can ask and what are the type of answers that we are looking at. So one of the services that SERVIR provides is enhancing drought resilience and crop yield security for Lower Mekong region. The objective is to provide drought nowcast and forecasts, and the outcome from the EIA that we are intending to have is improved planning by farmers and policymakers based on RIAS predictions. RIAS is the type of tool that is being used in the Lower Mekong region that is developed by SERVIR. The second one is seasonal, the flood predictions and frost forecasting. That is seasonal crop-related weather forecasts in West Africa. Intends on the outcome that we're intended to find is improved agricultural planning and reduced damages caused due to flood, drought, or El Nino. And the other one is crop type mapping and condition assessment in Senegal. The service is basically estimating crop yields and providing early warning of food insecurity. And the outcome of the EIA is improved planting and harvesting decisions leading to increased yields. And these are only a set of questions that amongst the 60 plus questions that came up in the assessment that we performed, but these are all related to food security. Quickly, the type of methods that we can use for EIA, which is economic impact assessment, and 3 major methods that has been used so far is a cost benefit analysis, value of information, and input output analysis. All this is basically a comparison between a baseline scenario and a scenario where SERVIR tools and services are existing as compared to when it is not, and what impact does that have on local level farmers. Some other type of models are basically other decision models like general equilibrium models, life cycle assessment models, random utility models, which would actually incorporate heterogeneous preferences of farmers. For example, in certain areas, farmers are guided by their emotions towards the land, like they have ancestral lands and they don't want to give up cultivating certain crops in those lands, or they don't want to give up the land at all, even if they are incurring a loss by cultivating on that. And then these sort of models actually account for the preferences quite well. So and also value of statistical life, which kind of is a controversial kind of thing to do, but it's like it enables economists to assign a value to life in particular regions depending on the costs and the investments they have to incur going by it. Some of the okay, so stepping stone to EIA of SERVIR tool is basically there were things that we could refer to, but that were done previously. One was by Valuables. Valuables was basically a 5-year project funded by NASA, evaluation of applications benefit linked with earth sciences, and they did impact assessment of earth observations. Some of the questions that are related to agriculture are: what is the value of a crop that could be harvested by reduced uncertainty in US corn and soybean crop yields? The approach they used was value of information, and they found that there was 30% reduction in the weather component that led to US consumer surplus of $1.44 billion. And these are the type of findings that we are trying to get at. The other one is basically NASA uses the GRACE satellite on groundwater storage for drought monitoring. And they used an approach called multimodal framework with a Bayesian updating process, econometric analysis, and also surveys across the regions. It was observed to have provided with reduced uncertainty in drought understanding, influencing policy decisions for social benefits. And the third one is it was actually a SERVIR evaluation report, which was funded by USAID, which is rapid response mapping and agricultural monitoring for food security in Nepal. And this was intended on studying flash flood impact in 2015. And the approach used was economic valuation model, although there is limited information available regarding this. But it was observed that, let me get to the exact value, yeah. So the decision influenced water allocation. There was 13,842 hectares of paddy that was damaged, and there was 3,723 hectares of maize field that was damaged. And these numbers we could find because of the economic impact analysis that was done. So then post which targeted rescue operations were dispatched, and the approach to this resilience was much faster than it would have been without the impact assessment. So this is my very short description of what we are trying to do, and based on the current projects, we will complete that in a year's time, and with post which we are going to move to subseasonal to seasonal forecast in West Africa, Burkina Faso, which is the third project in line, basically. And then that's how we are moving forward to trying to integrate economic impact assessments into the services. So at a certain point in future, we don't have to do the ground data collection. Whenever somebody is using the tools and services, we will be able to know how it is being used. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritika. With that, let's have questions from the audience here in the room as well as online. Maybe let's start in the room if you have any questions.
Sure, I have a question. I think it might be for you, Catherine. So I work for ACDI VOCA. We have some agriculture projects in Kenya, and I was wondering if you could give some examples of how the SERVIR's weather information might be used by smallholder farmers responding to the droughts and the floods more recently. When I know that USAID talks a lot about access to weather information as a climate resilience measure. Sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical though, because as smallholder, I mean, I kind of doubt how many options the smallholder has to be able to respond to information. So like, even if you were to be able to provide them with some information about increased drought risk, they're probably limited in options that they have to be able to respond to it, right? Like they can't necessarily shift planting days. They don't have access to a whole lot of machinery to like speed up a planting or delay a planting, like how a farmer in the US might be able to. So are there any examples of how you think it can be beneficial for farmers in
That's a really good question, and thanks for asking that. We were just having kind of a similar discussion about like all the things we do, don't really translate into some direct action for a farmer, or is not like directly usable. And then the examples for the SERVIR project, at least the projects that I've kind of worked on and have been involved in, including collaborating with UCSB, the team that's worked on the TRIPS data set, as well as this Early Warning Explorer. Majority of the teams we've trained or worked with at the ministry level, so people who work as analysts, who can interpret, who can use, who are actually looking to have access to this data. All the platforms that have sort of been developed before have APIs that others can build and pull data from and make SMS type messages, which I don't know how much farmers use these, but the broader intention, at least from my perspective, where I see clear benefit, is that when an analyst at the Ministry of Agriculture, and me observing, for example, some of the work that we've done in Kenya, is they're able, through the extension agents, one, to figure out what is actually happening on the ground, and then channel that into the decision-making process, which, some previous examples is like through preparing and summarizing what's going on across the country with the evidence that they've collected, they're able to say for sure that this particular region could benefit from fertilizer. And then they dispatch. So, they've had like exchanges where like, oh, the work that you're doing has led to this, as an example. And usually he's trying to make seeds or fertilizer accessible in places where it's needed the most, rather than, so I guess the extension agents will maybe reach out to the farmers and tell them that this has been delivered, rather than like a direct action to the farmer who might be informed of, let's say, a pest. If there's a pest in the region, the best way would be that that information is maybe sent through normal channels, like a radio program that farmers potentially listen to. It needs like this bridging across not only different capacities, but different roles, because sending an anomaly map is not useful, but an extension agent telling their farmer that this has been reported to have impacted this area, and these are the actions that you can take. So it's more like interpreting the data at different levels so that it's kind of contextually relevant for the individual, but it's largely through, in Kenya will be like county level, the county being aware of a broad problem affecting the county, and then channeling that to whoever can actually provide the best information. So there've been things like, this fertilizer doesn't work, from the exchange in this big WhatsApp groups, like this fertilizer doesn't work, or this seed is bad. Like that kind of information is really powerful. And having that network around this crop monitoring initiative is really powerful, because then the ministry is able to tap into what's happening on the ground with what they're trying to understand at a much broader level. Yeah. So just to say that there's levels of information, and the final information, I said this recently, that an Excel sheet is more useful for an analyst at the ministry than any data platform that you might develop. So to the farmer, it might be a radio program that they listen to, as an example. So I think it's our job to figure out how to distill and bring it into those mediums, for example, or partnering with people that know how to do it.
Any other question do we have from audience? If not, then I think that's all for us. Thank you so much for all the panelists here and also the audience. Thank you.
Coffee break, so you can
I mean, from the perspective of, like, I think also there are multiple things. One is, I like that, on your slides, you're talking about like the baseline and then building on that baseline. So like, I think maybe, I haven't seen the white paper, so I'm kind of really looking forward to it. It's like one recommendation would be that like for where the sphere is working, you could have like standardized baselines across all of them, and then when the projects kind of kick in, you could have like specific metrics, like specific things that might be applicable across, which might not always be true, but like those things would be tracked. So one of the reasons I say this is like, I've been asked before, like, could we figure out if our project had impact somewhere? And I was like, well, that would have had been an intention that maybe we can use Earth observations to measure whatever thing that we worked on, and how it translates into something that maybe potentially contributed to, right? So the baseline, and then what we do, how it fits with whatever things that we decided we want to do. And the second side of it is like, there's this like value